Hello everyone, welcome to the meeting of the Lower Central Garden Trust Board. Before we begin with the main items of the agenda, the first item is to elect a chair and vice chair. So can I take some nominations for chairman, please? Yes, you can yourselves.
Nominate myself.
Okay, thank you. We have a nomination for Councillor Gillett. Is that seconded by anyone?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favour? Okay, Councillor Gillett, you are now chairman in the chair. Thank you. And you can proceed with item 2, which is the election of vice chair.
So proceeding with item 2, the election of vice chair. Do we have any nominations? Anything? Steve, I nominate you.
And is that seconded? Thank you.
Moving on to apologies for absence. Have we got any apologies?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Lawrence Williams.
And do we have any declarations of interest in respect of the?
A non-pecuniary interest, but I'm a director of BH Live and BH Live Enterprises Limited. Thank you.
And do we accept the minutes of the previous meeting? We all received that and accept that.
So if I can just explain, Councillor. So unfortunately, the clerk who was present at that meeting is unfortunately unwell, has been for some time. We've attempted to source those minutes, but as yet have been unsuccessful. I understand that the only item on the agenda was the approval of the accounts. Not being present, can perhaps one of the officers who was present, or indeed a councillor who was present, just confirm that was the case? If that is the case, then I will prepare a set of minutes to that effect.
I was present, but there were some questions raised at that meeting, and I have to say, given that it was in January, now we're in September, I don't think it's really very acceptable that we don't have certain minutes from a meeting held last January. And in fact, it was the question that I raised at that meeting that generated my request for an item to go on today's agenda, which is not on the agenda, which I find very disappointing, given that I've raised it 3 separate times. It's still not on the agenda. Maybe we can come back to that later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, noted.
So moving on to the Lower Central Gardens Trust September report.
Thank you, Chair. For those who I'm not familiar with, my name is Kate Langdon. I'm the Director for Environment Services for BCP Council. I will introduce the report and cover off the sections that Environment Services deliver with support of colleagues where appropriate, and then other directorates will pick up the areas that they undertake activities for within the gardens, and that will become slightly more clear when I explain the restructures in a second in terms of the functions that are delivered by the services within Lower Central Gardens. So if I move on to the section 1 is the background. It's just a reminder of hopefully the training that you undertook in July, I believe, with legal services, just to explain the role of the Trust Board and the background documents that I believe have been circulated. Or can I check they have the conflict of interest and the charity scheme? Were they covered off in the July session?
They were.
Yeah, they were. Great, thank you. Just noting today that board members are asked to read and sign a copy of the conflict of interest policy that's attached in Appendix 1. If you have any questions in relation to that, do let us know and we'll try to support with that one. The Lower Central Gardens Trust are asked to note the challenging financial position the council is facing. I think you've probably heard it a number of times already, but just to say that we are currently working through options in how we are going to address the budget gap that the council has coming into 24-25, and that we will seek to engage with the trust as more information becomes available as part of that process. Moving on to council services internal restructure outcomes, following a review of the council's corporate organisational structure, which took place in April 2023, the table within the report provides an update of the Directorate Services leads for the primary functions that are undertaken within the Lower Central Gardens. And for those that may have experience of the trust, you'll see that this does mean that we are split out further than we have been previously. So within environment services, which, as I said, I'm the director for, that includes grounds maintenance, planting, the arboricultural services, the cleansing provision, footpath maintenance, and the aviary that's within the gardens. The commercial operations services, which is headed up by Amanda Barry, is now responsible for events that take place within the Lower Central Gardens, the concessions that operate within there, and that's the kiosks, the street food corner, the makers market, the mini golf, and they also take responsibility now for the memorial benches and the bin sponsorship. Customer Arts and Property, this is Matty Ridsep, has responsibility under facilities maintenance for the public conveniences there and the bandstand, and Housing and Communities, which the director is Kelly Ansell, have responsibility for responding to the antisocial behaviour, the CSAS provision, and the CCTV and monitoring that operates within the park. Does anybody have any questions before I move on?
Yeah, the responsibilities list. Who actually is overall responsible for the management of the activities? Who's providing the coordination? Who makes sure that the service or the directorates respond to the needs of the charity? Because I can't see in this chart any overall management or coordination of all these different activities.
We all report into the operations direct management team that's headed up by Jess Gibbons, the Chief Operating Officer. So the park itself would sit as an overall with myself within environment as the parks and open spaces there. But as a team, as I say, within the operations DMT, we will bring forward and discuss activities that impact the park as part of that management team.
I don't think that includes finance, does it? Or the commercial operations, which is a different directorate?
The commercial operations sits within the operations DMT with Jess Gibbons. The finance, no, does not. That's it separately.
Thank you. I've looked at the chart. Is that okay if I carry on another question, Chair, please? Yeah. I don't see here anywhere about the pavilion. Who's responsible for the pavilion?
Pavilion sits with BH Live. It's leased to BH Live.
No, the pavilion belongs to the trust. And BH Live use it.
I believe they have a lease to use it to them.
I don't believe it has a lease. There is a management agreement between the two, which covers all of the facilities that even if there were a lease, it is still the property of the trust. All the charges for the maintenance of the pavilion are in the trust accounts.
I can take it back and ask, but BH Live would sit within commercial operations, which would be under Amanda Barry. In terms of whether there is a formal lease or a management agreement, we'd need to go back to legal services to understand the background.
I can assure you of that, but of course, you know, that doesn't alter the fact that the pavilion does form part of the Lower Gardens Trust. It's it's in the charity documentation. We discussed it at this meeting before, because there are issues about the pavilion that I think that we need to address.
I understand you have raised questions about the pavilion, and they are currently sat with legal services to work through in terms of car park charging and income from, because they've been passed on to colleagues. We haven't got an answer to that at this stage.
I wasn't aware of faced questions about the car parking charges, and that's not the issue that I want to raise about the pavilion.
Oh, apologies. Sorry, that was what came out of the following the July member session.
Okay.
Had it noted as a question that was asked and
Okay,
to be followed up.
Yeah,
That's incorrect.
I didn't recall.
Okay, I wasn't present. Sorry, that was just passed to me by another officer.
Okay, but you know, the pavilion is the biggest asset within the gardens. It's got the highest value. It's, you know, it's 14 or 18 million pounds capital asset, and yet, you know, there's nobody on here that's basically looking at that on behalf of the directorates, which I find astonishing, really. And you know, as I say, all the maintenance, everything, all the charges are down to the trust. But anyway, you know, maybe we can come back to that later. Thank you.
Apologies. I don't know if the pavilion has ever taken part in the board meetings, but we can certainly follow it up.
Sorry, no, they haven't.
It hasn't.
Not to my knowledge. I mean, there is. So I am aware that there is an agreement which has got certain terms about responsibilities of who does, especially on the long-term repair and maintenance. Especially most of the park side was only responsible for basic wear and tear, and the pavilion themselves were responsible for the main infrastructure of the building. But that's as far as my knowledge goes, and that's my relating to another site rather than the pavilion. So.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just I'm aware that as a rough rule of thumb, BH Live are responsible for the internal aspects of the building, but the main structure is the responsibility of the council. And that's why the maintenance charges are reflected in the trust accounts, because that's where the charges are made to.
Yeah, my colleague here has said she will take it back and check with Amanda Barry and others, and we can update members either outside of this meeting or call another meeting to provide a formal update for you. And I appreciate, Councillor Bartlett, you referred to one of the items that has not been covered off in this report in relation to the finances, and so we are currently looking at setting up a separate meeting for that was discussed with finance, so that we can really have an open conversation and training session around those accounts ahead of the January accounts coming forward to the board. So that's in progress at the moment, so perhaps we can wrap the two in together. Moving on to a delegation of authority. This followed a request in, I believe it was the December meeting, to bring back to the board following a number of board member changes and indeed officer changes, to understand and agree the officer scheme of delegations, and these are attached in the report for your consideration. Any board member would like to have any questions on those?
Go ahead.
Yeah, when I looked at the list, it's actually more a scheme of responsibilities rather than delegations, and I don't think it really answers the question that was raised before I was actually on the trust, and that was about what officers are responsible for deciding and what should come back to the trust for decision making. And I think that, I don't know for sure because I wasn't there, but when the request for delegations to be clarified was made, it was more about what needed to be brought back to the trust, as opposed to what was the day-to-day operational matter, and it was that sort of blurring of the lines between the two that needed clarification, and I don't think that is given in the list. The list really splits out what the directors, each directorship is responsible for in terms of its responsibilities. It doesn't really go into, answer the question about what is delegated and what isn't delegated, because I think there are still some grey areas there that need to be clarified.
Are you able to examples of anything that you're concerned about?
And the other thing is the subject that I've just touched on, and that is about who has overall responsibility. Because at the moment, who coordinates the activities of the directorates? Who is going to make sure that the requests of the trust are actually acted across, and also where there is maybe there is people looking at things from different viewpoints. For example, the parks, we talked about the grass, for example, in the lower gardens, and the condition it was in, and clearly that's a concern for the parks department. But on the other hand, there is a pressure on the commercial area to ensure that the commercial things go ahead. And so there is therefore sort of a conflict straight away between those two. So it does need to be, someone needs to sort of take responsibility for the overall control of what's going on there, because there will be differences in many places. So I just think that in that list of responsibilities, we should have somebody that has overall coordinating responsibility. Because at the moment there's nothing there that says who is actually responsible. Who do I come to? There's a problem. Do I decide which director, which one of these 10 managers or whatever that is dealing with various things? So
it's a fair point. I can take that back, and we can amend again. As I say, operations director management team is where such items are discussed in terms of different directorates' needs and pressures in terms of delivering outcomes within Lower Central Gardens, but ultimately the decisions are made by cabinet or council in terms of the reports that come forward with the board engaged, as I say, when they fall out of from the list that's within the appendices. What we would call operational decisions have historically been undertaken as operational decisions. Anything outside of that, we've said we bring to the board, which is attached within that document.
Chair. Sorry.
Just going back on it, do you want to propose something in terms of a coordinator, or do you want to let them come back to you, Stephen?
I think I would propose that as I'd like to move that we do actually have an overall coordinating director, for the reasons I've mentioned. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have a seconder? Sorry, do we have a seconder?
Thank you, Chair. Kate asked me for an example of where in the delegation there are blurred lines, and I'm going to go, unfortunately, back to the planting in the lower gardens, because in our meeting of I think it was the 5th of November, the report that we given set out quite clearly that where things were going to affect in perpetuity what's going on in the gardens, then those issues would be brought back to the trust. Now, in that meeting, we were presented with what I believed at the time was a proposal about the planting in the gardens. Subsequently, that proposal was enacted. It was not voted on. We communicated about this in detail, but it did seem to me that was a major issue, and in particular the fact that the flower beds, some of the flower beds have been completely grassed over in several places. Now, I regard that as a major change that is going to be there forever, and one which does alter the character of the lower gardens. And yet that decision was made without it being tabled formally in any way at the trust. and I think that decision does effectively alter the character of the gardens. But I just think it needed to have been tabled and voted on. Anyway, I know that you're going to be coming on to this again in a minute, but I've got some questions about when this decision was actually made. Okay, but that's an example where I think that there are blurred lines between what is an operational decision and those that ought to be coming back to the trust because of the importance of them and the significance of them and the effect that it has in the longer term.
Yeah, very much, Ed. So I'd just like to draw members' attention back to the presentation that was given recently by Tanya Coulter. Unfortunately, she's not here anymore, so she can't provide points of clarification. But in her presentation, she was very clear about what the role of the trustee was. And this was not about interfering, or not interfering, but getting involved in day-to-day decisions around what the gardens actually look like. It is about the fundamental permissions and structures about how the trust develops. So there's very clearly a charitable trust, and it's making sure that the role of the trustee is about making sure that the council acts in accordance with those objectives, and they are very wide. So to give you an example, it's about what kind of activity can take place in the lower gardens versus what can't. So, for instance, something to do with a charity could take place, but only if it was maintaining its purpose as a charitable activity. It wouldn't be allowed to take on a commercial entity unless it was referred back to the trust to make that decision. But it's very clear that the role of the trustees wasn't to be involved in the day-to-day managing of the trust. And I wonder whether it would be useful to possibly just circulate Tanya's presentation again.
Just on that, so understanding that, say in respect of previous minutes, when you're looking at, it does appear that I could go back to April 22, that there were recommendations for CCTV and very specific things. So are you saying that's ultra virus in terms of the trust?
No, I think what we're saying is that there's, as officers, where there is a, I would say CCTV is a some might see as an invasion, but it is clearly a structural change to the park, and it might be seen by some elements of society as a restriction in terms of how you could use that park. As a trustee, your job would be to give your view as to whether you thought that was in accordance with the charitable objectives or not. Does it stop people genuinely enjoying the gardens? Does it prevent them from having access to the gardens? Does it restrict their appreciation of the gardens in any way? No, then you might want to say, well, we're happy that that is in accordance with the charitable objectives of the trust. If a concession were to come forward, but it's in a place where a concession has already taken place, we would see that as officers as business as normal. However, if a brand new concession that it occupied a footprint that doesn't already exist within the park, then I think that would be the point where officers would come back to the trustees and say, what's your view? Is it in accordance with the charitable objectives? And you have a view on that. And I think that the last big example of that was the ice rink, where clearly it's a commercial entity. It's temporary. It doesn't actually. It's never been part of the fabric of the park. So the decision was brought back to the trust to see whether or not they supported it, but not whether they supported it. It's whether they think it was in accordance with the charitable objectives in terms of helping maintain the gardens. Ultimately, the decision would be cabinets. Where the trustees have a, if you like, a card to play, is if cabinet decided they wanted the ice rink, you didn't think it was in accordance with the charitable objectives, you could then flag that with the Charities Commission, who would then themselves get involved with the process. So there are mainly two pieces of restrictions upon how officers work. One is the planning system, which is we're all familiar with, and the other one is, does this comply with the articles of the charity, the purposes of the charity? Hopefully that chair adds some thought.
Thank you, Chair. I refer back to the officer's report presented to us on the 5th of November, at paragraph 8, which says any activity that has a long-term impact, a major change from the norm, or was new to the gardens, was to be referred to the LCGT board for approval. Okay, now let me finish, please. Let's just take the beddings areas, for example. What you're saying is it would be perfectly acceptable from an operational point of view to grass over all of them. A big portion have already been grassed over, and that was an operational decision. I think what you're saying, that's none of the trust business, doesn't really affect the character of the gardens. So, is that what you're saying? That you know, you basically could just decide that you could grass over any area of bedding in the gardens?
So that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if the council, for whatever reason, made the decision that it had to grass over every part of the gardens, and that's a hypothetical if, you yourselves could take a view that that wasn't in line with the charitable objectives. The council is entitled, as the owner of the land, if you like, the tenant of the land, to be able to say, well, that's what we're going to do. You would then have the opportunity to say, well, we disagree. We think, based on the articles of the charity, the reasons of the trust, you would take that then to the Charities Commission, and they would be the adjudicator as to whether the council was right or whether you were right. But I have to say, the remit of the charitable trust is very broad. So one of the things that Tanya says in her presentation was, you know, there's an awful lot you can get away with doing on that piece of land, because it was written for that purpose. So yeah, sorry.
The point is we haven't had the opportunity to make that. We haven't had that opportunity to have that discussion. The decisions were made operationally, and it was only after the event that I, walking through the gardens, found out what had occurred, in the understanding that what had been set forward in November was a proposal, and actually the decision that had already been made, as we subsequently found out, the decision had already been made in the previous summer.
Another question.
Hi, my name's Roger Boone. I'm co-optee. I think perhaps some of this friction and problem could have been avoided if I think we agreed maybe a couple of meetings ago we would produce perhaps quite a long list of what needs authorization by this board and what doesn't. I know that could be several pages long, but perhaps then everybody's got a clear understanding before an action is taken as whether that needs to come back to the board, either at a meeting or just by circulating an email before that action is taken.
Are people happy if I were to move that we request that takes place, and we bring it back to the board so that we can have a vote on it, and then if there's anything that people want to put through in terms of amendments, because they don't feel that it sits within the responsibility of trustees, the 2011 Act, then they can do so. That was a very long proposal, but if I propose that, do I have any seconders? sorry, Councillor Martin, because he had his hand up first, and as everyone tried to propose, no objections. Fantastic. So are we right to move forward with that? Then we'll have a list of responsibilities.
That will have to be subject to legal advice as to what their view is around the delegations and whether that's appropriate. But yes, happy to take it back and investigate further. I'll come back to perennials when we reach that point in the report, Councillor Bartlett, if that's okay. Moving on to Lower Central Gardens activities and events, I'm just going to hand over, if that's okay, to Helen, who will just run you through this section of the report.
Thank you. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Helen Wildman, Head of Leisure. Firstly, I did want to give apologies for Amanda Barry. She's the Director of Commercial Operations and was mentioned earlier in the table, and she's been called away into another meeting. So I'll give the update for events and for the concessions that sit under leisure. So if I start with events, as detailed in the paper, there is a variety of major events that take place. There's the Bay Run, which is in March each year, with the Race Village positioned within the Lower Gardens, and 3,500 runners. That's a very community focus, promoting wellbeing within the community. You've got the Air Festival and the annual event with the programme in the gardens that links the town centre and the seafront, areas such as the Royal Navy Beat Retreat, films, entertainment and hospitality. You've also got Christmas Tree Wonderland and the ice rink. So Christmas Tree Wonderland takes place from mid-November until early in the new year. Last year there was an estimated 4 million that visited the attraction, and it raises the profile of the town centre and links the gardens with the town centre offering at Christmas. And there's a note in the paper acknowledging that it does have an impact on the condition of the grass, and the recovery for the summer season very much depends on those growing conditions, and there's close working there between commercial operations, events and environment within that, and it's just carefully balancing that key attractor for the town and what it brings, and the family offering and the vibrancy it brings in with that reinstatement that needs to take place. The consideration, and there's a recommendation within the paper, consideration being given to look at maybe reducing that ice pad footprint and looking at that family offering and the secondary use to change the priority to that more family and leisure use. Within the recommendation, within the paper, there's a recommendation that the council tenders for an operation for a further 6 years, but on that basis of that exploring that other offering within it. So that's a recommendation to consider. Sorry, do you want me to pause there? Yes. Chair.
Pass through.
So will the board be involved in the decision regarding the tender?
So within the recommendation in the paper, we're recommending that we go forward for the tender. I would probably suggest that needs to be fed back with some advice, but that it would be whether, I think previously we have given an overview of it, but I would suggest that then it would be the officers that would be marking those tenders. But I probably need to take some advice and come back to you on that.
Okay, and second question relating to the ice rink and what else you decide to put there. I seem to recall that a few meetings ago, it was disclosed that the council doesn't really make any money from the ice rink. Given the current financial plight, is that now going to be top of the agenda?
In terms of the ice rink and the offering, it's looking at what it brings to the area. In terms of, I would have to feed back that through to the head of events in terms of future offering and future modelling outside of the meeting. But the purpose of the Christmas Tree Wonderland and the ice rink was about bringing that key attractor into as a destination event into the town centre, rather than it being a commercial area. Gary?
So, Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting that there are some statements in here that does make you wonder what the purpose of the gardens is. Is the gardens there for commercial benefit to the town, or is it there for the enjoyment of the residents of the town, which is actually what it says in the charity registration? Because we've seen the damage that was caused last year to the gardens, and particularly the lawns. And in fact, I made a request, I think, that, you know, we look at that to see, you know, if we should be even continuing with it because of the damage that it causes to the gardens. You know, a paragraph here, for example, this has to be carefully balanced against the importance that this key attraction offers not only attracting people to the town centre, but also providing a busy, vibrant and safer garden visit. Well, you know, gardens have a quiet enjoyment generally. That's what gardens are for. They're planted out so you can enjoy the natural green spaces. You know, so you see straight away there's a conflict between the need for commercialisation and actually the charity's objective for providing the gardens, maintaining the gardens for the benefit of residents, because that's actually what it's for. But actually the emphasis now seems to be moving towards much more commercial opportunities. Now I'm not, you know, I'm just pointing out both sides of the story here, because the damage that was created last year was significant, and I think you agreed that it was. And even the lights, you know, the Christmas tree lights, caused significant damage to the lawns throughout the lower gardens, and I don't think they'd be covered even now. So, you know, I think when we're talking about what the responsibility of the trust is, you know, the trust is to make sure that the gardens do what they've been set up to do, and that is for the enjoyment of residents of the town and the vicinity, it says actually. So, you know, I'm torn here between protecting the quality of the gardens and the need, obviously, to ensure the town continues to be vibrant and successful. Of course, I am. I do. Yeah, so I just make that point.
Yeah. In response to that, Councillor Waller, I think this is the dilemma that you have, in so much as the council is the main owner of the land, if you like, and the trust was set up to make sure that the council had a third party to oversee whether or not they were staying true to those charitable trust objectives. So the irony is, you could well disagree with how the council wants to proceed. So if cabinet ultimately make a decision that says we're going to have that, whether the trust likes it or not, sorry to be blunt, but if the council decides you're going to have that whether you like it or not, or we're going to grass over the whole of the site or not, the trust's only position on this is to say that they can't veto it at this point. They have to challenge the council's position on the running of the charitable trust with the Charities Commission, and that was clearly put out in Tanya Coulter's presentation.
I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to disagree with you, and the reason is that there is one trustee, and that's the council. Well, it delegates that to this board, and so the delegation is to us. So it's for us to manage that delegation on behalf of the single trustee. So you know, it's us, the trust, to decide what happens in the gardens, and if necessary, it goes back to cabinet for actually anything that we propose to cabinet goes to full council. Actually, thank you.
And just coming back on that, if we have this sort of list of what the delegated powers are, then we can then take that back against the original trustee and work out, you know, whether or not it all sits together on that. So that'll be the basis point. Do you want to continue?
It's difficult as to how far we go. I think coming back to Councillor's Bartlett's point, I think as officers, we share your view on being torn at some point, and as directorates, we regularly have conversations around the balance around supporting vibrant areas that our residents want to visit, want to spend time, and also protecting the spaces for them to enjoy. And so I know Helen and Andy have regular conversations. So and in terms of the level of damage it causes, that it varies year on year. It's very weather dependent as to how much damage it occurs in each year. Some years it's minimal, some years, like last year, it was more extensive. So there is always that risk with them, but it's about finding a balance that fits with the majority and supports the majority of wishes of users there. So I don't. As officers, we're not looking to exploit the gardens. We as a service area, we spend a huge amount of time and resource in caring for them, so that we could be completely against our objectives to do that. But it's about ensuring that they remain purposeful for people to enjoy, and everybody has a different perception about what that should be. So it's a difficult one for officers to balance, and I think John Weaver, as head of events, has taken on board Councillor Bartlett's comments about the size of the previous ice rink, and is looking to reshape it this year to respond to that. And we'd need to see what the market comes back with as to whether or not that remains viable for them to even want to tender for it. So it would be the start of a process in terms of market engagement. If that helps.
Okay, thank you. So carrying on to the major events is also the Arts by the Sea Festival that attracts, again last year, about 100,000 visitors to the town centre and also to the lower gardens, and is very much a varied cultural programme, and there is Arts Council commitment for that festival. So alongside the major events, there's also the minor events that are day-to-day managed by the events team, and that is the small events, so mainly community run rather than council run, and things like duck races, bandstand performances, and that smaller events program that runs mainly throughout the summer but throughout that time as well. That was everything in the paper on the events. The concessions, there's the concessions of the Westover kiosk and the Picnic Park Deli, and notes in the paper that's looking to have an extended lease to give time to be able to tender that kiosk. And then there's also the other trading concessions which continue to operate as normal. Thank you.
Chair, are you happy for me to continue? Any questions at that point? So we move on to the grounds maintenance and cleansing operational updates. We move on to planting, which I appreciate Councillor Bartlett would like to make further comment on. So just for clarification purposes, the decision was ultimately made at full council in February 2023. We were tasked to start looking at the move to perennial planting in response to the council's climate and ecological declaration that it made back in 2019, I believe, Ian, wasn't it? And as part of that, we started to draw up plans and proposals. It's not just relates to Lower Central Gardens, but all BCP land. And as part of this, we did some informal engagement with Lower Central Gardens Trust Board members at the time in October on site within the Lower Gardens. We walked them through, we discussed broadly what was being considered at that point, and then obviously, as you were aware, brought forward the paper in the November. As this was a change that could support the medium-term financial plan, as it was being worked through during the autumn of that year, and because of the timings at which the decision, should it be taken, would be made, it fell within our winter bedding programme. So as an operational decision, because if the decision was taken to remove the budget allocation for annual bedding, we would be having to remove the winter bedding at the time when it was in full bloom to ensure that the move to perennial planting could take place for the summer season, so that we didn't have empty beds within the lower gardens. So that was taken with the knowledge of the chief executive and the portfolio holder at the time. And we also, in terms of engagement with the board, sought legal advice in terms of whether it sat within the Bournemouth Borough Act for the 5 parks and within operational decisions. Because whilst we agree it's a change, it wasn't a change in policy. Then no such policy has ever been in place within legacy councils or within BCP council. Whilst it is a change, it's a change that could be reversed at any time, or the layout of bedding can change at any time, which it has done over historically within the garden. So the legal advice at the time is that yes, it was it was appropriate as an operational decision, and was undertaken as such. I'll pause there in case there's any further comments.
Councillor Bartlett.
Interesting that legal advice was sought, but not the view of the trust on this item. And in actual fact,
sorry, I disagree in that it was sought informally in the October, and it was discussed in the November. And I recall individual members had some thoughts on it and made some comments. Other board members chose not to. So it was discussed.
It was discussed, and I accept it was discussed. In fact, we did actually, a number of people did express their concern about the proposal that was being made, and it was a proposal. But in actual fact, the decision had already been made, hadn't it? Because the planting had already been thrown away. 60,000 bedding plants had already been disposed of prior to that meeting in November. In fact, they've been disposed on, I believe it was in October. In fact, when I found out, again, something I found out by accident, and I find it was completely disingenuous, I believe, that wasn't declared at the meeting when we were discussing it. Because actually, at that point, there was no other option, was there? There was no plants there. So you know, that was the only thing that could have happened.
Sorry, Councillor, I have to stand and correct you. They were being grown at the Kings Park Nursery at the time of that decision. They were there to be used. It's just the decision was taken that because we've been asked to move to perennial planting, that we didn't progress growing on winter plants, but they were there. Some of them were actually sold through the retail outlet. The others have been composted down, and we reuse that within the parks. So the plants were there to go out to be planted. There was not a decision not to until that point in time.
So could you just clarify when they were composted then, please? When was that? When were they actually thrown away?
This decision would have been made after we knew that we'd been given permit. Well,
We didn't put the winter bedding in.
we didn't put the winter bedding in. We then moved towards doing the perennial side, at which point we would have composted them internally. So
Which happens annually when we remove the winter
do
bedding
that
plants
every
every year.
Could you just tell me what month in 2022 that decision was actually made to throw the plants away? Thank you.
I couldn't give, apologies. The discussion to not put in the winter bedding plants took place in November, I believe, wasn't it? I'm trying to remember, but they didn't go in the November. I'm not sure operationally when they were actually sold off, given to charity, or composted.
It was a chain of it was a chain of events that we were asked to do one thing, and I know it was a very late decision, which said involved the chief executive and the right people to make that decision to swap over. It was at that point we would have made the decision to compost them or sell on as much as we could until the point the plant became unviable to use, at which point we would have composted as we do per annum for both summer and winter bedding.
And that was for the winter bedding, whilst we awaited a full council decision around the annual planting budget. So at that point, it was just for the winter. That was not at that point a formal decision that there would be a removal of the annual bedding budget. It was just an operational decision that for this winter, that winter 2022, the winter bedding wouldn't go in whilst we waited for a full council decision, because of the need, if that decision was taken, that we needed to plant the perennial planting moving forward, which would have been digging them, A, putting them in, and then B, digging them up within a short period to get the
Roger
planting
Boone.
in.
Thank you. Clearly, whatever way you look at it, there's been a slight miscommunication regarding that issue. And my question, I guess, is, can we go back to having more vibrant colour in the main footpath through the gardens next year, or is that now out of the question?
The budget for annual planting has been removed by the council, so there is no funding available to do that via council funding. There is clearly opportunities to look to explore it with the community, potentially with the Bournemouth in Bloom group and others. That is an option, but in terms of council direct funding, there is no budgetary provision for it.
What do you reckon?
So with that in mind, if everybody agrees that we're better with colour in the summer than without, and I know I'm not saying that we haven't got the colour at the moment, but the colours we used to have and the vibrancy, can we make a note to contact someone for sponsorship or financial support in order to bring back what I believe is a key attraction and part of the historic fibre of the gardens?
Apologies, I just thought it'd be helpful just to put up a picture on the screen for anyone, just to
I can repeat the question.
no, you don't need to repeat the question, sorry, I just on that one. You can happily take that one on.
Yeah, so I'll take that one away, Roger, but I mean, the definition of what is bedding is a topic for a discussion in its own right. Bearing in mind in Victorian times, bedding was the new hot plant being brought in by the plant hunters, which are probably more in tune with what is actually in there now. And then where change in bedding has termed over time, from that to the bedding we used to get in the 50s and 60s and 70s, to where we moved to much more annualised hot plants again, which we've won national awards for, and we've just progressed to what is the right design for the gardens. I think that is a topic for discussion. But where are we trying to achieve? I would tend to agree with you, but the advantage of the perennial planting we've got now is it can be split as it grows, and we can then replant in other areas as time goes. And as Helen's already alluded to, if the ice rink got smaller, there's opportunity to move to the other side of the footpath to put the balance back that was there in the past as well. So the gardens have always evolved over time. From the pictures, you know, we was there from, I remember the balloon being in there, which dominated the gardens. And what is better, and so I go back, you know, I've got 34 years working in there, and it's been evolving every year. In some respects, is that what a garden's about? Should it evolve over time as well? That's a personal thing as a horticulturalist. I actually think the designs today, I actually quite like them. When I went down, I was quite pleasantly shocked at how good they were, bearing in mind they'd only been in a fairly short period of time, and they'll only get better with time. I agree. My team are fiercely proud of those gardens, and we'll move things on as can. But if the gardens, I'll leave it at that. So,
Just to wrap up.
I appreciate, and I agree with you, gardens should evolve, and I know we've had discussions in the past. I think, and I should mention, actually, I walked around this morning, and the grass looks pretty good. And what you've done in terms of flowers and plants looks great. But I think it's about balance. And I've lived in Bournemouth for over 50 years. And what's stuck in my mind, and probably quite a few others, is the brightness, the vibrancy, the colour, which I think has been lost a little. So if we can sort of pledge in some way to find a financial path and a will to just redress that balance in a little bit, I for one would be happy.
Chair. I'm happily to take that away with the corporate comms team to look at sponsorship opportunities as part of some wider work they're doing in other areas to do so.
Is it a new point, or we?
Yeah, just the point I'd like to make is that the Lower Gardens is a very small percentage in terms of its area for the whole of the garden chain. It's a very small percentage of it. Surely we must have an area where we can have some colour and vibrancy and maintain the things that the town is famous for, because that's part of the character of the town, and I believe that part of the character is now lost. So, and there's a lot more debate about it. I appreciate Andy's perspective on this, but surely we must have some space for beautiful, colourful bedding areas. And incidentally, I've read the green strategy. There's nothing in there that says you can't or shouldn't be putting the formal bedding plants out anywhere. I've read it in detail.
Absolutely, I'm not wasn't ever saying it shouldn't. In terms of it was just stating that we need to move to sustainable planting, both in terms of making sure it actually survives our climate as it continues to change, and the type of bedding that actually a number of our residents now want to see. It's down to personal choice and taste, but the feedback that came through some of the green infrastructure strategy consultation was of that view. But hopefully the bottom picture at least shows that the grass has recovered this year. It's not perfect, but it isn't looking as sorry as it was at the beginning of the season. And these are photos taken from this year. So the top three are examples of how the park historically looked, gardens historically looked, and these below are some of the planting from this year. And given that this year's weather conditions were not great, actually the perennials have started to establish themselves pretty well for an early settlement, and that will continue to improve as the years go on, with the team committed to doing so. Everybody happy for me to move on to the next item?
I think so, yes.
Oh, I am still showing. I will do stop that. Come on. Sorry. Cleansing. This was just to provide an update for you. Lower Central Gardens, along with seafront areas and some other high-profile parks, were afforded some additional funding for the last 2 years through both the seasonal response budget and Cleaner, Safer, Greener funding that ended again 1st of April this year. So we are now back to core service standards in terms of what was historically provided within revenue budgets. The only difference to that is that actually we've obviously been able to maintain the additional bins that were put in as part of that funding, and we are doing our best to ensure that we can try and keep up with the frequencies that were there, but that is at times a challenge now because we are working with less resource than has been in the park for the last 2 years when that temporary funding was afforded to, as I say, the gardens, but also the wider area there. Does anybody have any questions in relation to that? No? Okay, moving on. Public conveniences. As I say, public conveniences now are all centrally managed by facilities management, with the exception of seafront beaches, which are managed by Amanda Barry's team. The 2 contracts that previously provided toilet cleansing for those services came to an end at the end of March this year, and so a procurement exercise was undertaken with Churchill's contract cleaning services being awarded the contract for all of those. So we've gone from 2 providers to 1 provider there. The Changing Places facility during the COVID period of the pandemic operated with an attendance service. That currently isn't in place now, but has had some additional resource put in during busy periods to ensure that the cleansing is as much maintained as possible. We all know that the toilets have their limitations there, and I think previously there had been plans to do something different, but at the moment that the provision is the provision, and facilities management are monitoring that to see what we can do. Unfortunately, the site is subject to antisocial behaviour at times, so Andy's team also do keep an eye on those facilities. Any questions on toilets before we move on? Okay. Antisocial behaviour in Lower Central Gardens. This area of the service, as I said, is delivered by Kelly Ansell's team, and you have the community safety accredited scheme officers working through the Lower Central Gardens to provide that presence and reassurance to visitors. We also work very closely with the police, and you will be aware that there have been unfortunately increasing incidents of antisocial behaviour within the gardens, and we'll continue to work with partners and just outside the gardens themselves to provide that presence and reassurance. Again, the CSS resource was reduced. It was enhanced during the seasonal response funding that was provided, so we are back to core levels, but effectively there's the equivalent of one full-time officer working through that geographical location. Does anybody have any questions in relation to that?
Thank you, Chair. The number of actions, the enforcement actions, including 6 antisocial behaviours, injunctions, 1 closure order, 1 business closure order, and 90 ASB cases open. Are those all relative to the lower gardens?
I believe that to be the case, yes.
So can you tell us what business has been shut down?
Unfortunately, I can't myself, but I can take that back to the officer and provide an update to you. Moving on to the Lower Central Gardens accounts. I believe I mentioned this earlier, but the accounts are currently being produced, and I don't know if Stephen wants to come in at this time, and will be subject to external audit. We discussed this with Democratic Services and Financial Services and agreed it'd be helpful, I hope you agree, to have a separate session on the accounts for Lower Central Gardens, so that we can have that full open and transparent discussion about what is and isn't included and reasons behind that. And I think there is, as I say, some ongoing legal work that's being undertaken to support that at this stage. Democratic Services, I believe, are looking at a date that would be suitable for you to come forward. Neil, I don't know if that's still being worked through.
Still reviewing at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Regarding the accounts, I mean, I actually asked a question before the last set of accounts was approved. We had the meeting on the 26th, I think it was, of January, and the accounts had to be submitted to the Charities Commission within about 2 days of that meeting. So there was no actually at that meeting that could ask the questions, and it was that question that generated my request to put the accounts or the revenue recognition issue on this agenda. Now, since I've made that request, and I've made it several to various people, and here we are in September, and I still can't ask the question, or I think I'm going to ask the question anyway. But you know, my plea would be that we can clarify this before and we have a chance to discuss the accounts before they're actually submitted to the Charities Commission this time. You know, being confronted with a full set of accounts like that a couple of days, and we had no other choice other than to approve them. But I have to say, I was slightly uneasy about it at the time, But, I'm just very disappointed that, it's not on the agenda. I did ask, we are asked to put things on the agenda. I did that and it's not there. And yet nobody in all these months has come back to me and said, I'm sorry, we can't put that on the agenda, or we're going to have a meeting to discuss it or whatever. I only got that information yesterday. As far as I'm concerned, that really isn't acceptable.
Yeah, I agree in that I did take this away as a separate discussion point, because fully recognising that it's a full new set of members on on the board now, and therefore signing off a set of accounts that you don't understand the background behind how they are produced it would be unfair, and therefore that's when the discussion took place. But actually, we should hold a separate session specifically to study and understand how the accounts are produced, and that was supported by financial services and legal services, with democratic services, as I say, looking to put the data in. And absolutely, that needs to take place before the accounts are presented to the board for January sign off. Completely agree.
Could I just come in there, please, Councillor? The 2021 accounts were issued as a draft to all board members in the middle of November 2022, with the option there to come back, and to query any figures. And I did not have any queries regarding the figures. Hence, the accounts were put forward for submission for sign off in late January, before onward submission to the Charities Commission. But I will echo everything that Kate has said, and in her report, that we can go through the reasons for why certain items are listed in the accounts. And I'm waiting for a date. I believe Neil and his colleagues are working that through for us.
Thank you, Chair. One of the reasons that I'm querying, the revenue recognition bit in particular, because it has a bearing on the MTFB and the affordability of the investment in the gardens, and where the revenue is coming from, and where it's allocated, and whether it's being allocated in the appropriate place. Because if there is an issue about affordability, about what we can do in the gardens, we need to understand fully where the revenue is recognised and where the costs are going. And that's behind my inquiry. And at the moment, I don't understand why certain aspects of revenue are not recognised in the accounts, but the costs are. Simple. Thank you.
Chair, that ends the operational updates.
Thank you very much for the overview, and thank you for doing a photo montage of the flowers and not the public conveniences. Moving on to the final item on the agenda, we're looking forward to the next meeting, and also whether there are any agenda items. There is a proposed date on that, and if people could, well, I guess. Are there any amendments to the proposal that people want to run through?
Chair, could I just ask for some clarification? In terms of the recommendations, item C, I think we've agreed we're going to take it back and seek legal advice and come back with refinements to the appendices there. Within that, in relation to the ice rink, I'm sorry if I missed it. Did I miss that bit? Sorry. The ice rink in terms of we didn't. No. Okay. Because it's obviously it's currently an approved facility, and therefore, as such, in terms of historically, we'd understand that to be an ongoing operational approval to continue. Bearing in mind Councillor Bartlett's raised some concerns, is there anything formal the board would like to record in reference to that? Would the board like to see the details of what goes out as part of that revised tender in terms of the reduced space we're looking at? Is there?
Roger Boone.
Thank you. The answer would be yes from me, please. Not every detail on every stage, but sort of fundamental outline of what the tender looks like, what the brief looks like, and then potentially your shortlist towards the end of it and your thought process for awarding the site.
So just understanding that, is that under a delegated authority, because if we don't have another meeting till January, by which point the ice rink will have packed up?
It's not for this year, it's for next year. The ice rink.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I did raise the issue about whether we should proceed with the ice rink this year. I've had no feedback other than what's in there. Nobody's come back to me. I don't know who's made the decision. Someone's clearly discussed it and made a decision.
It's already a contract. It was a contract that was awarded,
Okay,
I believe, for a 5-year period.
I wasn't aware of that. I didn't know it was under contract. That's interesting. But yeah, and I agree. I think it's not just I think we'd want a really close look to see what's being proposed, and I think we should be involved at a very early stage. And I'm very pleased to see that some consideration has been given to the comments that we did make about the type of event, in particular, that it is a family orientated event, sorry. So yeah, I welcome that, and certainly it'd be great if we could have a look to see what's being proposed in advance. Thank you. Just touching on that, will the Christmas tree event still be going on this year? It will. Okay, thank you.
So moving on from that, are we okay with the well, we've got the proposed meeting dates for 23-24. Are we okay with the fact that board meeting twice a year with the next meeting date of the 15th of January 24?
Yeah, I'd like to propose that we have another meeting. Actually, I think one meeting in. I think we should need a minimum of 3. And bear in mind that one of them is inevitably all about approving the accounts. I think we should have at least one mid-year sometime, another one towards the end of the year. It's a huge gap between January and sort of November time. I think 3. I don't think that's overcooking it. I mean, I personally prefer quarterly, but I don't want. I would have thought, and I think that the trust did actually discuss this last November, when they actually did say that they thought we ought to have more meetings. So I think we should have at least one more.
Within the context of that, given that pretty much everything has already been pre-decided for the coming winter, and the accounts are going to be, are you talking about a meeting after the next meeting, so that things for the following year can be looked at, or before?
Of course, you're thinking about the municipal year now. Okay. Well, in that case, I would say between maybe June and another one in September or November or something like that, with the accounts obviously coming through in January, something like that. The sort of thing the chair could sort of organise with the democratic services.
Just trying to work out what the purpose behind the extra meeting is, so that we can schedule that in, because obviously at the moment you've got one in January, which will probably be all about the accounts, looking at previous minutes, and you've got the one now which is more policy.
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen that, where officers have to make decisions, and in fact, the paper talks about it, there's an operational urgency and everything. I think it's just better to get some of these issues out so we can just chat about them, and so we don't have any issues after the event. I just think one meeting where we can just talk over what's going on. It's not, we really just need to communicate more than we are. I mean, the actual charity thing says a minimum of 2 meetings. It's a minimum, and that's what we've got at the moment.
So in terms of that, I don't know if we had a meeting earlier in the year, say like July sort of time, and then one in September, which is roughly what we've done this year, but obviously there's challenges to that, or keep it as it is.
I just wonder, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
I just wonder if it would be sensible to have a meeting around the timing of the tender for the ice rink, because that's obviously significant for the gardens and our involvement. So to time that accordingly might make sense.
I think in the short term, we may need to put another meeting in ahead of January as well. So we know we've got to get, I think it's basically a few meetings. We know need to get the finance meeting in for yourself, training session in for yourselves. It may be that we need to meet with you again, depending on how the MTFP options are starting to shape up as well, so that you are cited on anything that may or may not impact the gardens in terms of service reductions or changes on how we deliver services. So I think we might need to keep that a bit live at the moment, and also we can remember we don't always have to meet formally, we can meet informally, so it may be useful to use one of the meetings more of an informal meeting on site, or however best the board feels that should be undertaken, but that's always an option there for you as well.
So do we have a proposal which is it's different to what we have on the paper?
So could I suggest then that officers obviously so the board delegates to the chair in consultation with officers to agree those any change to dates?
Yeah, no objections.
Officers in consultation with chair, I should say.
So just to make a point, I was getting a bit nervous about the emphasis on the MTFP, and it's in the report, and straight away I'm thinking, that actually from a trust perspective, the trust perspective is to focus on the gardens. Its focus isn't on what the council actually concerns are. You see, there's a bit of a conflict there. We're understanding the pressures, etc., but it does make me nervous when I see, see that, and well, it makes me nervous. I mean, we love the lower gardens, and we need to protect them at all costs.
Thank you. That closes the meeting at 12:21. Thank you.